I'm going to go find other authors like myself. So me being a Black man writing a kid's book, like already there's such a small percentage of Black men who just write children's books that it's almost like not relevant statistically. So it's like, what if I just found other underrepresented folks like myself and who didn't have to have a writing background? Like I don't have a writing background, but who had something to say.
Hello, friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick LaPara, and this is the show where I chat with people who saw something wrong in the world and gave a damn about it. I hope that today's conversation will help you give more damns in your world today, wherever you may be. I have a very special guest to introduce to you today. Jelani Memory is a Black entrepreneur, thinker, learner, and a very curious human. And he gives so many damns, as you're about to hear. He lives in Portland, Oregon with his wife and 6 kids. He co-founded Circle, a product that helps parents monitor and limit online time, site visits, and app usage. It's a wonderful product. We've used it in the past. And they partnered with Disney a few years ago to get it into many more homes, and now it's called Circle with Disney. Wonderful company. You should check it out. He also co-founded A Kid's Book About, a company that creates books that treat kids like they are smart and speaks to them straightforwardly and honestly about topics like racism, body image, divorce, failure, bullying, empathy, creativity, disabilities, and so many other topics. I love this company. I have 3 kids. We speak to them very straightforwardly and honestly, and I love that this company is doing the same. I know you're going to love them as well. During our chat, we talk about living in Portland as a Black man, raising children in a blended family, the 2 companies he has started, how he is giving a damn as an entrepreneur, and so much more. You're going to love getting to know Jelani in the next few minutes. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to give a huge shout out to this week's sponsor, Red Kap, a fantastic company that makes workwear and uniforms. Not only is Red Kap a Nashville-based company, which I love because I live here, but they champion the men and women out there who are committed to making our communities thrive. Everything they make, from work shirts to coveralls, is crafted with purpose and on purpose. They are a no bullshit company. What you see is what you get, and what you're getting with Red Kap is a group of people who genuinely give a damn about work and a life done right. So from now until July 31, you're running out of time, friends. We've been doing this for a few weeks and you're running out of time. From now until July 31, you can get 20% off your first purchase at redkap.com when you use the promo code GIVEADAMN. That's redkap.com, promo code GIVEADAMN. From now until July 31, 20% off. I also worked with them last month to interview some amazing damn givers all around the country that are beautifully contributing to their communities during this global pandemic. You can see that series. It's called From The Frontlines. You can see those interviews and learn more about these amazing people by going to redkap.com/community. Go check it out. Okay, let's get started, shall we? As always, my email is hello@letsgiveadamn.com, hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I'd love to hear from you. And here's my conversation with the fantastically fascinating Jelani Memory. Let's go. Jelani Memory, welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
We have been trying to get this on the books. That's not, nobody says that today because we don't write our schedule on books, but we tried to get those books for quite a while. And here we are. We're finally doing it. Us not doing this until this point is totally my fault. I have an overwhelming amount of amazing people that I get to talk to, and scheduling them, especially during this season, has been incredibly hard, trying to make everything work. So thank you for your patience, because I'm real excited to get to share who you are and what you do with the Let's Give a Damn family today. I've been, you remember us meeting, right? You know that we met, right?
Yeah, okay. 100%.
Well, we there's like a 6-year gap in there that we didn't really talk, or 5 years, but you and I met back in Portland a few years ago. A friend of ours was working, with you, and we met, and we're going to talk. Is it okay if we talk a little bit about that company as well?
Oh yeah, of course.
Perfect.
Of course.
I don't know if because it had been sold, if there's anything you can and cannot say, but I'm so excited about that.
It's all fair game.
Good. That company and product was amazing as well. So we have a lot to learn from you. You're definitely a doer. You're a mover. You're a shaker. And I'm thrilled to have you here today. Let's start with your name isn't just Jelani Memory. First of all, that's a rad name. But it's not just Jelani Memory, right?
It's not just Jelani Memory. So my full name is Nkoma Chioki Jelani Memory, which then proceeds to have everyone ask me, "Where are you from?" I
Yeah,
say,
right.
"Portland, Oregon."
Yeah.
But it's a West African collection of names, minus memory, and and Jelani means mighty, and Koma means last born child, and Chioki means God's gift.
Mm. I love meaning filled names. Nothing against kind of Western white Americans who name their kids, Chad and Julie
Sure,
and, Karen and Sarah. Like, it's kind of like, oh, that sounded right. Like they looked like a Chad, right? Or whatever.
sure.
My wife and I put, tons of time and thought into our kids' names. By our eldest daughter was Solace.
Mhm.
Solace India May, and the Solace was because we had a pretty traumatic failed pregnancy and then a failed adoption
Mhm.
before we had her. And Solace was a kind of a variation of the word solace, kind of a
Mhm.
comfort in troubled times. And
Yeah.
we were just very intentional. And the kids, it's funny now that they're 5, 7, and 8, we can see how, oddly enough, in the kind of the way the universe works, they match up so much with their name, and they're kind of embodying who they are. Belle, Scarlett Amore, Roman, August Clark. Like every name, every part of their name has a
Sure.
ton of meaning. So I love that, that your parents kind of thought through that as well,
Yeah. I found not just with my name, but with others' names, I do believe there is some sort of prophetic quality to it. It's hard to describe, but somehow somebody becomes inextricably linked to what their name is, which I think makes it all the more powerful when someone decides to change their name is they intuitively understand that they are creating a new future for themselves or a new identity by changing their name. And I think names are really important. And it's funny, I always get asked, "Oh, is Jelani the easier name to say? Is that why you go by it?" And I go, "I've always gone by Jelani. Everybody in my family goes by their middle name. I have no idea why, but
Wow.
it's what we go by."
Yeah. I just a few weeks ago I interviewed Charles Robinson. He is a wonderful, wonderful man, and he and his family are amazing. He started a cigar company to fund his nonprofit,
Mm.
and they're really amazing cigars. I'm a huge cigar connoisseur, and he is from the Choctaw tribe. He and his family are Native American, and she is Barefoot tribe, I think, from up in Canada. Anyway, all of their kids' names as well, and
Mm.
he actually named they're right now making their 4th cigar, and the first 3 named after 3 of his kids. I'm pretty Nanaya is peace, and I forget the middle one. Damn it! But the other,
Mm.
and then Tashka means warrior or warrior spirit. That's their son, and it's just really cool.
Yeah.
I really love that the time and intentionality that's put into the name. So thank you for explaining your full name.
No
But
problem.
we'll go with Jelani today.
Yeah.
I love that name as well. How are you? I mean, and I want to give some context to the how are you. You're a Black man living in America during a really interesting, to say the least, time, not just from a pandemic standpoint as an entrepreneur and a father and a husband and all that, but I mean, just the racial tension right now. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor. I mean, we could go on.
Yeah.
Those aren't from years ago. Those are in the last couple of months. And I must note that those are the ones that we've captured on camera. Those are the ones that we know about,
Sure.
etc. There's been so many others. And, there's been protests and rioting and looting in your own city. There's been, just upheaval and unrest. And it's been wild. It's been wild. So how are you doing?
Yeah. That answer has been different across the last 45 days or so. Each day, the ups, the downs, all over the place. But as I sit here today, before we hopped on, I said I was tired, and that's true. I'm very tired. One, because my wife and I just bought our first house. Two,
Congrats.
because I have 6 kids, and 3, because I'm running a company. So those are actually the big reasons why I'm tired. But I find right now, if I step back enough, I think it's a remarkable time to be a black man in America. And what I mean by that is we are living through what arguably is the largest, maybe most significant civil rights movement ever in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't want to sleep through. You know what I mean? I want to stay vigilant. I want to stay present. I want to be that thing that I'll have wish I said I was 30 years from now. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we all have this idea that if we were, back in the days of King and Malcolm X, we would have marched, we would have said stuff, we would have signed petitions, we would have done all those things. And I think the reality is we would have found all sorts of caveats of why not to show up, why not to do things, why not to say anything, because whatever the reasons were. And yet in hindsight, the good guys are so obvious and the bad guys are obvious, and what was right is really obvious and what was wrong was really obvious. And I think it's really apropos being on the Let's Give a Damn podcast is a lot of my life right now is making sure that I give a damn every single day. And forcing is a strong word, but encouraging those around me to reckon with whether they're giving a damn or not as well. I've had the privilege and the honor to get to share my story quite a bit because of my book, a kid's book about racism, and my experience as, black man in America, with white kids and black kids, with, a white mom and a black dad. Growing up in the whitest big city in America is just sort of this really unique position that I've been put in. And for me, I see extraordinary change on the horizon as a possibility. And I'll say, like, that makes me hopeful that change is even possible, because I do not think it was possible before. Like, something is happening now. And I think it's a confluence of everything: COVID-19, the technology that's captured all these brutal killings and murders, and this sort of emptiness of willing to tolerate more, and the grief that we're all experiencing because we can't go out and distract ourselves. It's all sort of colliding in this amazing moment where people who otherwise would have sat on the sidelines and gave all sorts of excuses are now stepping into the game. And it's exciting. Really, it's exciting. That doesn't mean the work's easy. That doesn't mean that it's not tiring. And that doesn't mean that things won't go back right where they were before. And look, I've experienced more racism in the last 30 days than I've experienced maybe the whole, like the whole totality of my life leading up to this moment. So the aggression, the hatred, the vitriol is stepping up to sort of match where the movement is. And yet I see the movement being all the more strong. I see the movement being all the more meaningful to push for change.
I love that attitude, and I 100% agree. I think people, we're not good students of history. And so even those that are on the right side, air quotes, those that are fighting for equity, justice, change, peace, love, all of those things that we need and crave and want right now during this season, even those people, which are a lot of like millennials and like they're younger people, they haven't done their homework enough to know that every real lasting change, every revolution, all of these things that have taken place throughout history, not just American history, world history, like throughout time, they all come with hard shit. Like you almost can't there's no such thing as a peaceful, because humans will ultimately, leaders and followers alike, will look out for their own. They're going to work in their best interest. They're going to, they have all of their baggage and their biases, and they grow up maybe as racists or whatever. And they're going to, so to change, to make these changes, whether it's right now, this kind of this racial change that we have to make, and whether it looks like defunding the police or whatever it looks like, the changes that are to come cannot come without some upheaval and unrest. I don't think so. Because for, these people that are getting on the TV and getting on social media saying, absolutely no to rioting and looting. And I am not out there doing that, but I understand it fully. I understand, because these people are saying, well, you had you had years and decades to change and you haven't.
Sure.
So we have to take things up a notch, right? And so
Sure.
all of the craziness, all that to say, all of the craziness does not, it's hard and it breaks my heart each and every day, but it actually gives me hope because it takes these kind of revolutionary, buildings being toppled down. I mean, again, think throughout history, the walls that have had to come down, the buildings that have had to come down, the administrations that have had to come down in order for us to see lasting change, right? And I think that's happening right now. It might not always look pretty, and not everything is going to be done well in that process, but I think the outcome is going to be, I hope, a more just, equitable society for more people than before. Maybe not everybody, because we're humans and we have thick skulls and we don't learn well, but for more people than before.
Yeah. I think it's not just about moving the needle. I think often the needle can't move without some force, and often it usually takes a whole sort of sea change, right? It moves significantly and then it sort of freezes again, and then it requires more learning, more knowledge, more movement later. Very often, I think what was achieved by the slaves being freed was one movement, and what was achieved with the civil rights movement was another movement, right? But it was never all the way. And by no means do I feel like this movement now will get us there, but it'll get us closer. And even, in my experience, the conversations that I'm having now are just fundamentally different than the ones I was having before. I mean, before it was such a closed door. Now, granted, some of the conversations I engage with, I realize people they don't even have the context to the words we're using literally mean different things. And so I'll talk about systemic injustice or racism or inequality. And it's like I'm speaking a whole different language, because I actually believe it actually is a whole different language. It's a whole different life experience. And it meets a wall, and very well-meaning people will say all the wrong and hurtful things. But there's this other group of people that are now something cracked open. I even want to say, for my wife, something more cracked open. She's like, I just didn't know. She's like, I see just a little bit of it now, and I'm heartbroken. I said, good, be heartbroken for 10 minutes. Now move to, it's not about you.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's good.
And still observe and still see and still recognize and start to grow in that understanding. Every time she's like, did you know? And I was like, yeah, and I knew.
Yeah.
I was like, this is new. This is not new for me. This is not my first time seeing that. This is not my first time realizing that. If you can't tell, my wife is white. And to some extent, I do not blame her. She never had a shot.
Yeah.
You grow up in a very white state that has incredibly racist roots, with your white family, secluded in a white community, at an all white school with one brown kid. I mean, you just never have a shot. Right. And so the work that takes to undo that, I recognize the difficulty in that. And yet it is so important and absolutely required. Not for me, the Black person necessarily, but for us as a society, to be a just and equitable and fair society, which I think everybody says, oh, I love that. I want that. Yep. Just like everybody would say, oh, well, I'm not racist. It's like, that doesn't mean you don't do racist things all the time. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love what you just said about not just your wife. This is the majority of white Western, Americans, right?
Sure.
Is this past generation did a horrible job. Our parents did a horrible job doing the opposite of what you're doing. This is why the work that you're doing is so important, and the work that my wife and I are doing with our kids, and that a lot of people our age are trying to do with our kids, right? Is because so many kids today, not just the past generation, so many kids today don't have a shot because the parents are doing a piss poor job putting the right things in front of the children, right? Yeah. They're letting the kids just be. They just exist. Whatever you want to do, you want to be on TikTok all day, you want to be in front of video games, you want to watch TV, whatever you want to put in front of yourself, go for it. Versus the parent saying, whether it's a parent, caretaker, guardian, whatever the situation is, being so incredibly intentional about it. Even my parents, I grew up in I had a much better shot than many others. where I grew up in Guatemala. My parents were missionaries. And so I spent, 9-10 years in Guatemala. Then I traveled, and that caused me to have a big enough worldview that I spent the next 6 years traveling the world. So it did get me on the way. But most of their parenting, I love my parents to death, but most of their parenting wasn't very actively like, hey, they actually were, we were part of this like super fundamentalist Christian circle at the time. And it was, hey, stay away from all those things. We don't talk about that. I mean, my parents are an interracial couple. He's Guatemalan, she's, American from New York. And we were taught growing up that, like interracial marriage is not okay with God. Like they were an interracial couple. Yeah. And they taught us that's not okay. Because you look at these really obscure, weird passages in the Bible, right? And it's and if you just read it as is, as if it's like a command and not a horrible thing that was happening back then. It's like, oh, so anyway, like I think that's why the work that we're going to talk about here in the next few minutes that you're doing is so incredibly important. Both the company that I met you when you were doing and the company you're doing now, both of them are so intentional. And I think the kinds of things that we have to continue doing, because our children are way smarter than we give them credit for. Yeah. And we'll get into that here in a minute, but they are so smart. And we just think, well, they'll get it eventually. That's what middle school, high school, college is for them to, no. But by the time they're 8, 9, and 10, their brains and ideas, at least a shell of an idea is fully formed. They're already set on a path, whether you know it or not. And you've already shaped so much of who they are for the rest of their lives by the time they're 9 or 10. So you have to get them from the time that they can speak. You have to start putting good things in front of them. And I've also learned as a parent that, I grew up in a fairly, abusive household. That is, my parents are totally different now, thank God. But it wasn't a good upbringing for in so many ways. And what I've learned is that my role as a parent, and maybe you've experienced this too, you got 6 kids, it's amazing, but is that it's not about micromanaging everything that our children do. It is about putting good things in front of them. I mean, I spend every single day. I mean, I screw up sometimes and I get kind of micromanagey, right? And then I pull myself back. That's not my job, is to dictate everything they should be doing all the time, right? It is putting good things in front of them and then pointing to those things and saying, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? Interact with that. Let's talk about that. And that's exactly the kind of work you're doing. So real quickly, before we get into Kids Book About and Circle, can you give like a 5-minute, because you alluded to your story earlier and you've even got this, amazing name that is very rich with, I think, kind of meaning and background. In a few minutes, can you give me some context for the who, what, when, where, and why of your life, how you got to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So, born the youngest of 4 kids in Portland, Oregon, to 2 drug addicted parents. The first Black person my mom saw was when she was 18 years old and she moved to Portland, Oregon from Bend, Oregon. So just, imagine that. Mom's got 4 kids with dad and they're both on drugs, and mom decides to get clean. And she says, Dad, you can come and hang out with us, in our new home across town, away from the drugs, when you get clean. And he never gets clean, or at least by the time he gets clean, he has no interest in joining our family. So mom raises us all on her own, and, working 12-hour night shifts as a nurse, working with really sick babies in the NICU, and then driving us kids to school, and then sports, and making lunches and dinners, and driving to friends' house. I mean, I did 3 sports year round, karate, did so many sleepovers I can't even count. And my mom's like a superhero. Like she did all that stuff on her own. She put her whole life on hold for us kids. But the house was tumultuous. I witnessed domestic violence, with my brother and sister, and experienced abuse and neglect and poverty, and and was left to fend for myself in a lot of respects from a parenting perspective, because my mom didn't have the bandwidth emotionally, nor did she have the time to parent me. And then, dad was nowhere. I saw him maybe a dozen times throughout the rest of my childhood before I was 18. So you can imagine, what's a 13-year-old do with zero supervision and a desire to make his own way in the world? You make a lot of mistakes. But thankfully, I had just a series of what I'll call my father figures who stepped in at different seasons of my life and were so influential in my development as a man, as as a person, as a brother, as eventually a father. They single-handedly, the collection of maybe 12 or 15 of them, might have saved my life, as I grew up. Sports was my entire life growing up, and art, two totally disconnected things. But my goal was either to play in the NBA or become an artist. Like that was it. When I realized that I was not tall enough or fast enough or could shoot well enough to be in the NBA, which, by the way, I was actually a really good basketball player. It just turns out you cannot teach height. It's just
no, you cannot. Nope. One of those things they haven't figured out with all the technology.
Yeah. So, I'm in my senior year. And let me step back a second. I have this really incredible, formative, life-changing experience where it's in my junior year of high school. I'm going way long on this, but it's really worth it.
It's fine. Yeah, go for it.
I'm in my junior year of high school. I'm arguably the most popular kid in school. I play 3 varsity sports. I have all the friends you could ask for, and I'm depressed, unhappy, and I really hate my life. I am also incredibly smart, and sort of understand that I have everything I should want, and yet I am empty inside. Why do I feel this way? And so I literally said to myself, like, self, you cannot be the answer. Because if you were the center of all these things, like if you were the center of the universe, it's all going to come crashing down, because you're not it. You just can't possibly be it, because you've taken that path this whole sort of 18 years and it hasn't worked. So I literally made a conscious decision to pursue something outside of myself, to be my master, if you will, to be my ruler, to be something that was the guiding thing that I lived by. And I chased it super hard. I looked into, mysticism, world religions, I looked into it all, something outside of myself that was greater than myself that I could chase and pursue. And, I even got this little book, and it's got chunks of ancient scripture from each of the major world religions. So the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Quran, et cetera, et cetera. And I found myself floundering. And one night, I got asked by a friend, hey, I'm going to this thing tonight. You want to come? Sure. Why not? Turned out it was a Young Life club. Never heard of Young Life. I'd never been to Young Life before, but I went and I had the most incredible time I had ever had in my life. Like it was like I had tasted cake for the first time, having never had sugar. It was like this exhilarating experience. And then we heard a little message from the Bible at the end about building your life on sand instead of rock, and how poorly that would go. And I did something that was very uncharacteristic of me, because I'm an introvert. I went up to the speaker afterwards and I said, hey, I really love this. Can we learn about this more together? Can I study with you? And he was like, whoa, like, yes, this is exactly how I wanted this talk to go.
Yeah, for sure.
And we spent the next, 8 months pouring through the Bible together. And he was very gracious and kind and patient with me. And to be honest, his answers weren't always good or right, or he couldn't always satisfy all my questions. I was a smart kid, and I was also a bit of a cynic, so I could poke holes in just about anything and everything.
Sure.
But something about the relationship and that brotherly love, that connection, that familial sort of like, he was going to be there for me. He was a person that I could count on. That held a lot of weight for me. It held a lot of weight. And in that context, learning about Jesus, learning about the gospel for the first time was tremendously impactful. So I go that summer to camp, and I am ready to let my life change, which I think is the best way to describe it. And I make a commitment at camp, which is, well, I won't get into why it's funny, but I make what I understand is a lifetime commitment to go a different path, to literally like see that fork in the road and going, I'm going to choose that one. It's new and fresh and I don't know what's at the end of it, but I'm going to choose it. And that sends me on a completely new path in my life that has literally dominated every aspect. And I would say it affects the businesses that I build. It affects the way that I parent. It affects the friendships that I have or the people that I pursue. It affects my internal life, my external life. And, you know, there's some irony because right now, you know, the idea of being a Christian is so, you know, it's so fraught because
it's tough.
It's tough. And what I mean by that is like the entire group of people and the many media organizations and, you know, our president and have taken it as a weapon to wield against people who are Black, who are brown, who are immigrants, who are different, who are poor, who are, yeah, I just, it's so unimaginable and unthinkable that my faith, that the Bible itself, that the Christian idea would ever lead anybody to do that. And yet that is, I think, the popular conception of it. And I have no shyness about proclaiming my faith because I want to be that example of what it actually really looks like, not some sideshow, but to go, you know what they're doing, it's actually the exact opposite, you know, and I find more in common often with individuals who seem so far away from it, who go, I'd never get close to anything Christian, go, actually, a lot of stuff you believe is it's very Jesus. Like it's actually very close to his heart. I digress. So I end up at Bible college of all places, a little small school, 400 kids. I was going to go study industrial design to make sneakers. My dream was to go do sneakers with Nike, and it turns out school is way too expensive. So I ended up at Bible college. I had 4 incredible years. For the first time, I wasn't playing sports and realized all this free time I could go chase other stuff. So that was student government. That was starting an improv comedy troupe. That was starting a couple of businesses. Like I just realized I was bit with the entrepreneur bug. I just wanted to start things.
Yeah.
Spend 4 years there. I'm ready to finish. And a friend of mine is taking photographs at the time and doing quite well for himself and making some money. And I'm like, oh, like it's artistic, it's business. It's pressing all the right buttons for me from an entrepreneur's perspective. So I literally buy a camera a month before I'm supposed to graduate college. And a month later, I am paying all my bills with a camera. So I was like, wow. I guess that means I'm a photographer now.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I was okay in the beginning, but I loved it. It was so fun. And yeah, it went from selling stock photographs to, you know, photographing babies to weddings, and then eventually getting to really high tier commercial stuff, Nike, Adidas, Reebok, and getting to chase and making things out of nothing. And, you know, remember when I said I wanted to be an artist, I was getting to live that out. I was getting to that artistic side of myself while embracing this new part, which was the entrepreneur part, which I'd sort of cultivated in college. So I'm trying to think, well, this leads into the business. So I guess we can start talking about Circle. Is that cool?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. Cause so with Circle, your first big, I mean, first of all, thanks for sharing that story. I mean, the context is super, super helpful, and we could spend another hour on just your story. There's so many things there, but for the sake of time, let's jump right into Circle, which is when so what's clear at this point, at least the thing that I want to focus on right now is you seem to be good at, you know, there's a lot of young people out there that kind of boast about being idea people, right? I'm an idea man. I'm an idea girl. Like I have good ideas, and it's like, who gives a shit? Like everybody has there's a million good ideas sitting around in notepads. That's not the thing. Having ideas is nothing if you can't execute on it, right? If you can't make something out of that, that's the real skill That's where the rubber meets the road, is like taking that idea. Sure, the idea is not nothing. It's good. You have the idea down in a notepad or in a note or whatever.
Sure.
But until you actually make something out of that, which is the whole, let's give a damn is all about getting people from feeling something
Sure.
to action, right?
Sure.
We are not action oriented people. We want to talk about it. We want to think about it. We want to feel it. But when it comes to acting upon it, because that's work, that's hard work. That takes time and energy and money and everything you don't have, maybe all of it there. And you have to actually do something with it. So yeah, let's jump right into that part of your life.
Well, let me address that real quick, because I think it's really important. I don't always think it's the work part. I think we work really hard at the things that we love. I think all the time. We do it all the time. We will stay up late and sleep for 3 hours and work the next day to play a new video game. Like that's work. Like that's effort. That's the it's not insignificant, but we couch it in, well, I just wanted to, right? I think the barrier between that idea and the execution of the thing is often fear sitting right in between. And when we are afraid, usually it's afraid of the outcome. What will people think of me?
I think you're right.
What if I fail? Which then comes back to, what will people think about me? What will they say about me, right? And I realized in college, I don't have any of those internal mechanisms. Like for some reason, they just don't exist. Whether it was because sports and I learned how to fail again and again and again and again, because you just lose games. That's just normal. So I realized if I could just treat these like games, it's okay to lose some as long as I win some.
Yeah.
But for me, that sense of risk and fear, I'm never going, if this fails, people are going to think I'm stupid or dumb or bad.
Yep.
I go, if anything, people will think I'm courageous for trying. Like that's an easy leap for me to make.
Yep. Same here.
But then again, like I still, like anytime I have to go on stage, I get super crazy nervous, and that's attached to like, oh, like people are watching me, and there's like, again, I'm an introvert, so it's not that I'm immune to all those things. I just think when it comes to taking action on those beliefs, that the fear for me, I don't feel it as strongly, so it enables me to do some of those things. Okay, so circle. Get a text message randomly from a good friend, and he says, I've got an idea, and I think it's worth something worth chasing. So that ends up us spending the next 3 weeks over his kitchen table going, how do we create the best environment for our kids with technology? We want to give them all the iPods and the iPads and the iMacs and the TVs, and they all connect to the internet now. But how do we make sure they're only spending an hour on YouTube instead of 6 hours on YouTube, right? So we come up with this amazing little device that allows you to manage all your devices in your home without ever putting software on them, that any parent can install, and all works from your smartphone. So that product was called Circle with Disney, and we got to partner with Disney, which is a whole own cool story. And me, I'm not a technology person. If anything, I'm a creative first, and I'm a storyteller. And so the way that we created product was through telling ourselves stories. And that was really my job, was to go, what's the story of the mom or dad with their router, with their kids? What are they looking for in this moment? And we came to this idea that they're looking for peace of mind. When you see a kid on a device with that sort of look in their eye, there's a sense that they're wasting away, that they're wasting their time, that they might be on something inappropriate, that, why don't they get up and go outside, right? So we wanted to give them peace of mind. So that meant visibility on what your kid was doing. That also meant the ability to step in and go, you know what, we are going to pause this and we're going to go outside. So we literally created a pause button for the internet. Spent 7 years building that up, had the time of my life. We raised 30 million in venture capital, which sounds really cool, but it ends up being, really problematic when you actually get in that position. And the VCs start saying no and yes and yes and no to things. You're like, wait, who's running this company?
We're no longer in charge.
Yes. Yeah. Like, damn.
Yeah.
And really thankful to have learned that lesson.
Sure. Yeah.
Quite honest, but I'm a risk taker. So I'm really good in the early stage. Once you start getting, as a bigger company, older, the conservative people are there, the Harvard grads who have the MBAs are sort of going, well, let's have another meeting about that. Let's make sure we get some consensus. And I'm like the guy who's like, yeah, I'm just going to go grab my laptop and do it.
Yep.
And I'm going to show you. And I might just ship it because I also just might do that.
Yeah.
That starts to play a lot less good the further you get into a company. And I found myself being sidelined. And look, I don't blame anybody for sidelining me, because I'm like an anarchist. Like I want to start stuff from nothing, and like that doesn't work in a 60-person company where you need like process. But it also is like a thing that has to work if you really want to achieve scale and growth and significance. I do not think brilliant ideas come by consensus or committee. I think they come from people being willing to take a risk and having the freedom to do that. So by 2018, I'm tired, I'm burned out. We're fundraising this big $20 million round. And I'm like, man, I need something outside of work. And it was the first time I'd ever sort of said that. Like I loved work up to that point, but I was like, I'm toast right now.
You said 2018, right? So 2 years ago?
2018.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm like, I've always wanted to write a book. I'm going to write a book. And I was like, and I like, literally, this is still in my roadmap for life of going, I really want to write a couple science fiction books. Like I've got a couple ideas. There are notepads. I just got to like sit down. I got to take the time. I was like, I can't do that this summer. I don't have any time. What can I do? A kid's book. I love kids books. So I'm sitting down with my wife and I'm like, I want to write a kid's book this summer. She's like, cool. What's it going to be about? And I was like, I think it's going to be about my experience growing up with a Black dad and a white mom, and that experience of being mixed. I go, just something about it seems really important. And I think it'd be a great tool, because we were just about to have our newest son. And I knew for him, he was always going to be explaining himself from a race perspective about sort of what it meant for his skin color to be as light as it is. And where are you from? Are you Black? Are you white? Are you Mexican? Etc. So I write this little kid's book, and I'm trying to find a title for it. And I'm like, what is this actually really about? And I was like, this isn't really about me being mixed. This is really just about racism. Like that's what I kept coming back to again and again, the thing that I wanted my little son Solomon to have, and ultimately my other kids. So, I write it in a week, and I design it, and I give it a title. At first, The Kid's Book About Racism. And I'm like, it's a terrible title. Like I can't call it that. And then eventually I'm like, what's the more humble version of this? The less de facto version. I was like, like A Kid's Book About Racism.
A Kid's Book About, yeah.
And it ends up being this nice little artifact that I'll leave behind for my 6 kids as a way to continue to foster that conversation around something that's important to me and affects me. And that was already an ongoing conversation in our family. So I get the book. Takes like 3 weeks to get in the mail. I hand it to my kids. They think it's really cool, but something kind of miraculous almost happens when I show it to other adults. They're like, whoa.
Yeah, sure.
This is cool. Can I have a copy? And I was like, no, like it's like a $25 copy. Like it's a one-off.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, oh, ha, ha, ha. And then meet with somebody else. And I'd be like, oh, check out this thing I made for my kids. And like, whoa, can I have a copy? And I was like, come on. Like, and you have that conversation 15 times in a row. It's like, I'm starting to get annoyed at this point. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And then everybody would follow it up with the same exhortation. You should think about making more on other topics. And I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. like royalties, publishing, inventory. I was like, I'm already running a business. It's going quite well. And I was like, doing another one that's a terrible business model. I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. But then, you go to bed at night and you're like, does publishing have to be that bad? Does it have to be that stupid? Like, can it be a little different? And then for me, it always starts with lists. Like I'll just make a list of like what's in my head. And I found myself at work in the middle of the day, like supposed to be like working on a project. It's like, I'm making a new list now. And there was a day where I was like, okay, like if I did topics, what topics would I do? And I sat down, and in a half an hour, I had a list of 100 topics. And I was like, shit, this is really good.
Yeah.
And I was like, half of these conversations I will never have with my kids because I don't know how to have them. I'm too afraid to have them. And I'm pretty good at having conversations with my kids, but I was like, this is like, it's too much.
Yeah, sure.
So I was like, damn, I got to start another business, which led to me talking with my CEO and co-founder and the board and just going, I'm ready for my next thing. And I'd like to step away from this business and go chase it. And they were really gracious to put me on retainer for a year. They didn't have to do that so that I could still feed my family. Let me invest on my stock on schedule. Didn't have to do that. Anytime I tell another venture capitalist that, they're like, wait, they did what?
Yeah, sure. No, I
they
understand.
they didn't sue you?
Yeah. That's not typical in any way.
It's incredibly rare. And I set off to try and go, I'm going to build a new kind of kids book publishing company that focuses on hard topics. So racism, anxiety, depression, cancer, death, loneliness.
Yeah,
List
body
goes on.
image, shame, belonging,
Exactly.
money, failure.
And so many more. And we're going to make the books in literally an eighth of the time that it takes a traditional publisher to make the books. They're going to focus on design, color, and layout as opposed to illustrations. They're going to be twice as long as a normal kid's book because mine was twice as long because I needed more time to say things.
Yeah, yeah.
They're going to be targeted towards 5 to 9. They've started school, but by 9, they're still listening to their parents after that. So it's a little dodgy. Before they also have their smartphone, and parents are typically still reading with them at nighttime. And then, I'm going to go find other authors like myself. So me being a black man writing a kid's book, like already there's such a small percentage of black men who just write children's books that it's almost like not relevant statistically. So it's like, what if I just found other underrepresented folks like myself and who didn't have to have a writing background? Like I don't have a writing background, but who had something to say because it was coming from a first person experience, right? And so, I was able to set about constructing a business in the matter of 8 months from sort of, genesis to launch. We launched with 12 books and a team of 3
Amazing.
people with authors from a couple best-selling authors, one 14-year-old girl with cerebral palsy who wrote this incredible book on bullying. And we just, and we write all of our books in a single day. We literally sit with the author either in person or via Zoom, and we write it in 5 hours. We call it our workshop method. And the idea is to give the book some urgency, some honesty, some rough edges, if you will, so that we're just talking to kids straight. They're ready. They deserve it. They can handle it. And the only one in the equation that's not ready, that often can't handle it, is the adult.
Absolutely.
They're afraid of what to say. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to screw up their kid, but you got to talk to your kid about some of these stuff. You know what I mean? And so that was really the genesis and the sort of the impetus behind the business.
I remember getting a copy of BJ Novak's book. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And
huge inspiration for me.
Exactly. And you would think that kids would not have, that is black text on white paper, all throughout. The kids love it. They ask for it all the time. We are not giving our children enough credit in any way. As a parent, I constantly feel like a failure because, and not in a failure like I chastise myself, but for a moment I'm thinking I need to do a much better job. The other day I'm with my kids at the park and we pass, Nashville's been going through, as Portland has as well, tons and tons of upheaval and protests and stuff around all the things that have been happening in America. And there was this war monument and someone had spray painted "Silence is Violence" on the side of it. And she looked at it, read it, and she's 7 and she's like ridiculously smart. My kids won't listen to this podcast, so I will say she is the smartest of them. They're all really smart and they all have a huge worldview already. And I'm so grateful. We've done some of that and life has done some of that. Yeah. But she sees this sign and she says, "Silence is violence." She goes, "That means that we must stand up for ourselves and for others and do what's right for our community."
Wow.
And I was like, shit, okay, I'm going to take some credit for that, but I'm also going to say, I'm just going to sit for a moment and just being grateful for that. Like when I was 7, I was not even living in a foreign country. Like I was not saying things like that.
Yeah.
I was not thinking things like that. Thankfully, I got opportunities to develop in that way now. And I think I'm much further along than most people because I've spent time in 30 countries and I've done a lot of things that most people will never do. But at 7, hell no. Like I just wasn't thinking silence, like even just processing through. Some adults have a problem with, like they feel that rub when you say silence is violent, what? Blah, blah, blah. And she understood it. It was like a light bulb went off. Yeah. First time she had seen that phrase and she knew what it meant. She got it. And so I love the idea of books. Not that picture books are wrong. They're not bad. It's not a right or wrong thing. But we must give our children credit. We must give our children the chance to understand these complex, big topics like depression. body image. Like our kids need to be my 8-year-old daughter. She's a tremendous human being. She's wonderful. She already is thinking about body image,
Yeah.
even at 8.
Yeah.
And it saddens me, but it also excites me that a kid's book about is a real thing
Yeah.
in her world.
Yeah.
That she gets to grow up in a world where we aren't not talking about body image
Sure.
at 8. We're going to talk about it. It's a real thing for you, Solus.
Yeah.
Like we need to talk about what you're feeling, what you're processing through already at 8 years old.
Yeah. Well, it does something remarkable when we were very strategic and with the idea of a kid's book is it's a third thing. So the kid doesn't feel lectured or talked down to by the parent. They don't feel like the parent contains all
It's
the
good.
knowledge and I'm somehow getting it. They're co-learners alongside the parent, which then
Super good.
this conversation, I mean, you just hear again and again. I had the most amazing conversation after I read one of your books. And my kid had all these thoughts that I never knew they had. And something about the book, which I noticed with adults actually, when I showed them my book, they would open up parts of their lives. I was like, you never told me that before. And good close friends. And I realized there was something about the permission of unlocking and opening that space for that vulnerable space for me around racism and my identity and my skin color was doing the same thing for them. And we watch it happen again and again with kids. And actually my kids, their first instinct after reading my book was to go, can I make a book too? Which is them going, I want to tell my story.
So good.
I know things about things. And one of my daughters, she was like, I want to make one on divorce. I don't want kids to not know what they're going to go through. She was 10 at the time. That for me, our books aren't perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but they are new. And that I think is really important. This way of speaking straightforward to kids with the real words about a thing, not having any cruft around it, is new from a children's book perspective, and at least new from a collection perspective and how we're chasing it. And I'm really, and this is a bold statement, but I'm really trying to live into the legacy that Fred Rogers left behind.
Yeah.
In giving kids the dignity that their lives are complicated and they go through real experiences and that they really do want to talk about it and they have questions, they have thoughts about it. And it is no wonder to me that Fred's schooling, his theological background is the same as my theological background and spending time there. And I credit that time in college as a big driving force in the two businesses that I've created. And I don't think a lot of people would draw a straight line to those things. And even I don't think a lot of people draw a straight line to the topics that we're addressing and the way that we're addressing what the kids book about. But I think there's a perfect straight line in that, like, our lives are complicated and they're full and I think our books are just as much for the adult as they are for the kid and helping them walk through that stuff and process that stuff and not ignore it. Right. And not just pretend like it doesn't exist. And I'm really into the idea of going out and finding stories that don't get told and telling them in a really straightforward and honest way to both kids and grownups. And I think we're achieving that to great effect. And like, I can't tell you, like, we have so many more books in the roadmap.
Yeah.
Like the goal is to be at 200 books by the end of next year and just like keep going, like keep making really important books for kids, not that are perfect, but that open up these conversations.
That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. So much more we could talk about there, but I want to point people to a kidsbookabout.com. How many books are like they can start getting? It's a subscription service, right? Or can they buy one-offs, or is it the subscription box the way to go?
Any and all of the above. You can buy one book. You can buy 3 books. So you get 25% off and free shipping if you buy 3 books. So that's usually the way most customers go.
Yeah.
We also have a subscription box and we'll send you 1, 2, or 3 books every month, every other month, or every 3 months, up to you. And right now we have 21 books and we'll literally the rest of the summer, we'll be adding 1 book a week for the rest of the summer. Have, another 10 coming out before the end of the year. And all in this idea of creating, really important books for kids that are challenging, that are empowering, that tackle some of the most important topics that they'll interact with.
I love that. And you just recently got a check from Black Founders Matter, right? I saw the news of the
Yeah.
investment that you guys are getting from them, which I think is huge, right? Because I think you also, I was reading the piece about it, and you wanted room in, raising money for your company for, Black investors, right? People of
Yeah.
color to invest in what you did. And so it seemed like a really great marriage there where was it their first check that they wrote?
It was their very first check. And in
It's
fact, when
amazing.
Marceau was starting up the fund, I said, hey, I want you to be my first check. And it turns out they ended up being my last check, which is a bit funny. But with my last business circle, we raised $30 million in venture capital. And the only Black or brown person on the cap table was me. $30 million. So I was like, when I went out to raise this million, I was like, never again. Never again will that happen. And so I was patient and I was thoughtful. And I pursued certain investors because I wanted their presence on the cap table. Because here's what happens. If you're successful as a startup, a lot of that money goes back to your investors, obvious, right? But if those investors are the same sort of white men who have all the money, who make the more money because they're the only ones who can invest in those things because of how investing requirements are created or who runs venture capital funds, like it just creates this cycle, this loop. And I was like, I got to break that loop, which means I got to invite people in, and often this will be their first investment, right? And I got some 5, 10, 15K checks from Black investors who it was their first check. And I was like, look, I am a slam dunk to bet on, but I go, in a lot of ways, like I want to bring you into this because I don't want to value create in the same way that every other startup is doing. And if I can get this going in a really profound way, hopefully there's some wealth creation for you that you can then continue to spread so that we don't just have all the same white men investing in all the same successful companies and making all the money and then throwing us some crumbs when they feel like it's like, oh, well, we'll create a diversity fund and we'll give you some money, but it won't be like the Facebook money. It'll just be like some other money,
I would like to invite you on again. We'll do another one. This one was about, and here's what I want to talk about is exactly what you're talking about, this being a Black founder. And because I think there's a whole other conversation we need to have around what it takes to start a business in America as a Black man or Black woman, and it's probably even worse in a sense for Black women to start companies, right? Or to be leaders in any way in any company, right? And also just because I think there's a whole I understand that world. I love the tech world. I love the business world, but a lot of people don't. And I think there's a lot to talk through there, numbers, statistics, and what it takes to raise money, because people need to know during this season in America, there's a lot of, it's easy to kind of like pat Black people on the back and say, I'm so sorry for everything that's going on. And we should. I mean, I believe in reparations. I believe in I'm all into that. But I also think we need to put Black founders and Black leaders in front of people as a way to model what could be, right? It's shitty and there's bad things happening and we need to tackle these things head on. We need to, it is not the time to cower. It is not the time to pull back. And what we're trying to do for more and more people is give people the opportunity to do that X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And if I could, leave with one parting thought, I find with a lot of white people, the instinct is to go, oh gosh, it must be really hard for you, and to feel bad for me. And it's like, I don't want the outcome of what's happening now for you to pity me. Like, come on.
Right.
Like that's its own form of really sort of insidious racism that I don't want.
1,000%.
I want you to believe in me. I want you to see me, right? I want you to recognize, because we've always been here and we've always been contributing. And even I'll say, when people refer to Portland as, a really white city, they're also couching that with the idea that Black people don't exist here or don't contribute here or don't have anything to offer here. And I go, no, that's totally wrong. Actually, it's the exact opposite. And so for me, I get to go about telling my story and having had the experiences that I've had and having had some success, especially in the entrepreneurship world. I get to go, I'm not just some special case, some special charity case that you give money to just because you feel bad, but because I'm building something significant. And guess what? There are other Black founders like me. They just don't always get to get in the rooms or the doors because the hoops that we have to jump through are so crazy just to get there. And then by the time we get there, I can't tell you how many investors were like, oh, this looks really interesting. Have you thought about going to an impact fund? Like that, this really seems like what's for you. And which is code for you're running a charity. you know?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm not running a charity. I'm building what I hope is the most significant, children's media business built in the last 50 years. That either is hyperbole or we'll do it, right? But don't pat me on the head, don't say,
Yeah.
good job, kiddo. See me, recognize me, value me. And I think every other Black entrepreneur, every Black individual trying to do something that matters wants that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear that. Let's do more of that later. Jelani Memory, thank you so. I know you've got to run. You've got a meeting with your company, with your team.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us here on the Let's Give a Damn podcast today. So grateful to hear your story, to hear more about the work that you're doing. We're cheering for you, and we'll be in touch, brother.
Thank you.
That's the show today, friends. A huge thanks to Jelani for joining me on the show, and thank you for listening. Many thanks to Red Kap for sponsoring this episode. You can find links and more details about this show and more about our sponsor by checking out the show notes at nicklapara.com or letsgiveadamn.com. Nick Lapara, that's me, created this show. Chad Snavely produced it. Let's Give a Damn is part of the wonderful Matter Media family. You can reach me anytime at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I'm sending so much love and peace to each one of you. Stay safe during this pandemic. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.